What if I told you the greatest naval battle of World War II wasn't won by who had more ships, but by who had better secrets? See, most people think of warfare as brute force, bombs, guns, ships, but the Battle of Midway flipped that on its head. It was a chess game played on water, with codebreakers, gut instincts, and just enough crazy courage to rewrite history. And the wildest part, the side that won was the one that was supposed to be outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. In just a few days in June 1942, the United States turned the Pacific theater upside down. One bold decision after another, one lucky break after another, and suddenly Japan's dream of dominance sank beneath the waves. Literally. But don't be fooled. This wasn't luck alone. This was strategy in its purest form. Patient, daring, and absolutely brilliant. If you've ever doubted whether one move, one thoughtful, intelligent, even risky move, could change everything, then buckle up. Because this story, it isn't just about Midway, it's about what happens when preparation meets opportunity and how empires can rise or fall in the span of a single morning. Let's dive into the untold genius behind the battle that turned the tide and discover why Midway remains one of the most masterful plays in the entire playbook of war. See, wars aren't just fought with bullets and bombs. They're born in boardrooms, crafted in quiet, and triggered by fear. And back in early 1942, Japan was getting nervous. Not the kind of nervous that makes your hands shake, but the kind that makes empires plot. America was rearming fast, rising like a wave, and that didn't sit well with Admiral Yamamoto. He figured if they didn't act now, they'd be playing defense forever. So what did Yamamoto do? He went all in on a bold plan, like a high-stakes gambler betting the whole pot on one hand. His target? Midway Atoll, a tiny speck in the Pacific with massive strategic value. The idea was simple: lure out the US Pacific Fleet, crush it, and secure Japan's dominance for good. But oh, it wasn't just brute force. This thing had layers. Deception, bait, and shock value were all part of the package. Yamamoto's strategy unfolded like a three-act play. First, a diversion up north to the Aleutians, meant to distract. Second, the real punchline at Midway, where the carriers would pounce. Third, mopping up the survivors and planting that imperial flag. On paper, genius. In reality, well, we'll get there soon enough, but let's just say, even the best-laid plans can unravel fast when the other side sees the script. Here's the kicker. Yamamoto believed the Americans would be blind. He banked on surprise, no resistance, but when ego meets assumption, history often throws a curveball. And trust me, World War II had a few. Because while Japan moved in silence, thinking their chessboard was clear, a quiet little breakthrough was happening behind closed doors on the US side. And this, my friend, is where things start to get really interesting. Because in a smoky room full of papers and coffee cups, one man was about to crack the code that would flip everything upside down. Picture this. Deep in the basement of Pearl Harbor, a crew of oddballs and brainiacs were working around the clock, not with rifles, but with radios and riddles. At the center of it all, Commander Joseph Rochefort, a man who looked more like a math teacher than a war hero. But don't let that fool you. This guy was about to play one of the most pivotal hands in World War II, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Now, the Japanese used a complex code system thought to be unbreakable. Keyword, thought. Rochefort and his team in Station Hypo had been chewing on that code like a tough piece of steak. It wasn't glamorous work. It was slow, tedious, and loaded with guesswork. But one day something clicked. They saw a pattern. Midway was codenamed AF. The pieces were falling into place. To confirm their hunch, they pulled a move straight. Out of a spy novel, the US base on Midway sent out an unencrypted message about a water shortage. Sure enough, Japanese intercepts reported that AF was low on fresh water. Bingo. Rochefort had just exposed Japan's plan, and suddenly the hunted became the hunters. The US wasn't stumbling into a trap. It was walking in, fully armed. Admiral Chester Nimitz, cool as ever, didn't waste a second. With Rochefort's intel, he positioned his carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the battle-tested Yorktown, right where Japan thought they had empty ocean. Imagine setting up an ambush while your enemy thinks they're springing theirs. That's not just luck. That's strategy meeting brilliance. But hey, knowing where the enemy's headed is one thing. What you do with that knowledge, that's where legends are made. And as Japanese forces moved forward, still wrapped in confidence and radio silence, a very different storm was brewing on the American side. So here's the scene. While Japan was busy executing Yamamoto's grand design, part of the plan veered north. A full-blown distraction, the Aleutian Islands, cold, remote, mostly uninhabited. The hope that the US would scramble to defend. Alaska and leave Midway wide open. Classic misdirection, like waving one hand while the other reaches for the prize. But this time, the audience wasn't fooled. Thanks to that juicy code break we talked about, the Americans saw right through it. Nimitz didn't take the bait. Instead, he held his cards tight and focused his attention where it mattered. Meanwhile, the Japanese invasion fleet under Admiral Kondo was cruising toward Midway, expecting an easy sweep. But just offshore, tucked beneath the waves and clouds, the US was already getting into position. American bombers launched the first waves of attack, hoping to shake up Kondo's forces. And let's be honest, it didn't go great at first. The strikes were brave but clumsy, like trying to swat a fly with your eyes closed. Missed targets, mechanical failures, even crashes. But don't write them off just yet. Every mission, every launch, every risk, it was buying time, building momentum, softening the ground for what was coming. Meanwhile, Admiral Nagumo, tasked with leading Japan's main carrier force, had no clue what was about to unfold. Japan's strict radio silence, meant to protect the operation, also kept him in the dark. He still believed the Americans were days behind, and that right there was the danger of overconfidence. When you assume you're ahead of the game, you stop checking the scoreboard, and oh, the scoreboard was about to flip fast. Because by June 4th, Nagumo was ready to rain fire down on Midway, unaware that American eyes were watching, and American planes were already climbing into the sky. June 4th, 1942. The sky over Midway turned into a theater of war. At dawn, Nagumo gave the order, and a swarm of Japanese aircraft roared toward the atoll. Bombs rained down, shaking the island like thunderclaps. Runways were torn, fuel tanks exploded, and American defenders scrambled like ants in a storm. On paper, Japan had landed the first blow, but the fight was just heating up. Back at sea, US squadrons were launching in waves, wave after wave, aircraft with gutsy pilots and little backup. The first American torpedo bombers came in low and slow, perfect targets for Japanese Zero fighters. They were brave, sure, but terribly exposed. Nearly every one of them was shot down, and the worst part? Not a single torpedo hit its mark. It was heartbreak in the sky, but here's the twist. All those failed attacks weren't failures at all. See, while Japan's fighters were busy chewing up the torpedo squadrons, they left the skies above open. That chaos, that was the setup. Sometimes the greatest victories are born from apparent defeat. The Japanese carriers were still vulnerable, exposed, and unprepared for what was about to come next. Meanwhile, tension was rising like steam from boiling water. Back on Nagumo's flagship, Akagi, reports were pouring in. Midway wasn't neutralized, American resistance was stronger than expected, and something felt off. But with the carriers mid-rearm, decks cluttered with munitions and planes, the window for adjusting plans was closing fast. And right in that moment, Amid smoke trails, rising doubt and scattered squadrons, Nagumo would face a decision that would shape not just the Battle of Midway, but the entire course of world. WWII. So here's where things got real. At exactly EO 705 hours, a Japanese scout plane finally spotted something unexpected. American ships, not just any ships, carriers. But Nagumo didn't get the full picture right away. Just a vague, late report. And right before that, one of his own pilots had just radioed in, asking for another strike on Midway. Talk about timing, huh? Now imagine you're in Nagumo's shoes. You've just hit Midway, but it's still operational. You've got planes returning, low on fuel, others waiting, fully armed for a second bombing run. And now, bam, a new threat appears on the horizon. Do you rearm for naval battle or finish the job on the island? Tick-tock. The decision had to be made in minutes. He chose the island. The irony? Just as the crews were swapping bombs for torpedoes, mid-task, decks cluttered and exposed, confirmation finally came through. American carriers were definitely in the area. That gut punch hit like a wave. The Japanese fleet wasn't hunting anymore. They were about to be hunted, and the worst part, they weren't ready for it, not by a long shot. Back on the US side, commanders had no idea how perfectly the stars had aligned. But the tension was brutal. Every carrier, every squadron, they were gambling everything. And yet, Nagumo's fumble had cracked open a golden opportunity. It's funny how history pivots on moments like this. Decisions made under pressure, with half the facts and double the pride, and right as Japan tried to adjust, to recover, to catch its breath, a group of American dive bombers appeared out of the clouds like hawks with steel talons ready to change the game forever. Out of the blue, literally, came the angels of destruction. American dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown, led by Lieutenant CMDR Clarence McCluskey, spotted the Japanese fleet just as they were most vulnerable. It wasn't strategy alone, it was guts, luck, and intuition. McCluskey had taken a gamble, flying farther than protocol allowed. But that risk? It paid off in spades. What they found was almost too good to be true. Japanese carriers with their decks cluttered with fuel lines, half-armed planes and exposed crews. It was like hitting an enemy with their shield down and their chin up. In seconds, Kager and Soryu were ripped apart by fire and steel. Flames erupted, ammunition cooked off, and panic set in. The surprise wasn't just tactical, it was total. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse for Japan, Akagi, Nagumo's own flagship, took a fatal blow. One bomb was all it took, right through the flight deck, igniting a chain reaction. Fires raged, crews scrambled. Nagumo had no choice but to abandon ship. Imagine watching the pride of your navy vanish in black smoke within minutes. That's not just defeat, it's devastation. In less than 10 minutes, 3 of Japan's elite carriers were either sinking or burning beyond saving. Just like that, Yamamoto's intricate, confident plan fell apart. It wasn't just about planes and carriers anymore, it was about momentum. And now Midway belonged to the Americans. The battlefield had flipped on its head. The hunter had become the prey. But even in the darkest hour, Japan wasn't done yet. One carrier, Hiryu, was still afloat. And her captain? He wasn't going down without taking someone with him. Now, if there's one thing to know about the Japanese Navy, it's that they didn't back down easy. With Kaga, Soryu, and Akagi gutted, Hiryu stood as the last carrier afloat, and her commander wasn't interested in retreat. Nope, he went. Full samurai, rallying his air crews for a swift counterattack. It was gutsy, bold, maybe even reckless. But in war, sometimes reckless is all you've got. Hiryu launched her first strike like a fist in the dark, and it landed. The target, USS Yorktown. Bombs tore through her decks, and before long she was listing covered in smoke. But here's the twist. US damage crews were built different. They patched her up like it was a leaky boat at a summer camp. Within hours, Yorktown was back in action, a floating miracle of grit and duct tape. But Hiryu wasn't done. She launched a second wave, and this one did the job. Another hit, more damage, and Yorktown's luck finally ran out. The ship went dead in the water. Yet even as the crew abandoned her, they knew something big had just happened. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain. They'd bought time, held the line, and absorbed Japan's last real punch in the Battle of Midway, because while Hiryu was throwing haymakers, American scouts had already locked onto her position. This time, planes from Enterprise and Hornet flew out, vowing to finish the job. They found Hiryu, they struck hard, fires spread, the damage was fatal. By sunset, the last Japanese carrier was a burning skeleton on the sea, and the skies over Midway were finally quiet. But silence doesn't always mean peace. The aftermath of this battle would echo for years, changing everything. Because what America had just done wasn't just a win. It was the moment the tide of World War II finally turned. When the smoke cleared and the ocean calmed, the numbers told a brutal story. Japan had lost 4 frontline carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Over 2,500 men were gone. Hundreds of irreplaceable planes lost. And worse, the cream of their naval aviators, pilots they couldn't easily replace, vanished into the sea. This wasn't just a tactical loss. It was a spiritual one, a punch to the heart of the empire. And on the flip side, the Americans didn't just win. They outplayed, outthought, and outlasted one of the most powerful navies on Earth. At Midway, David didn't just beat Goliath, he did it with cracked equipment, raw pilots, and intel wizardry. More importantly, the myth of Japanese invincibility shattered. The Pacific wasn't their playground anymore. Before Midway, Japan was expanding fast, like a tidal wave swallowing everything in sight. After Midway, that wave hit a wall. And though the war was far from over, the direction had changed. From here on out, America would push forward, one island, one battle, one hard-earned victory at a time. The momentum had shifted, and there was no going back. Back home, this win lit a fire under the American spirit. Headlines screamed, "Victory!" Morale soared. Suddenly, the war didn't seem hopeless. People believed again in strategy, in courage, in the idea that brains and bravery could beat the odds. Midway became more than a battle. It became a symbol of what was possible. And yet, with every turning point in history, new questions rise from the ashes, because this victory wasn't just about ships and planes. It was about choices, chance, and the invisible threads that tie it all together. Which brings us to a story worth telling from the very beginning. So now that you've walked through every twist, every bold decision, every near disaster, and historic triumph of the Battle of Midway, let me ask you something. What turning point are you standing on right now? Because if Midway taught us anything, it's that victory doesn't always come from strength. It comes from foresight, from adapting fast, from having the courage to take risks when everything's on the line. The Americans didn't win because they had more. They won because they thought smarter, acted bolder, and believed they could change the outcome. What if your next bold move could turn the tide in your own life? If this story inspired you to think differently, challenge assumptions, or trust your gut a little more, then you're already halfway there. But don't stop now. There's more to learn, more to explore, and 1,000 lessons buried in the battles of the past that still echo today. So, if you're ready to uncover more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We've got a lot more coming your way, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single battle.